Welcome to The Outlet, an NBA podcast hosted by Nick Fay and Kory Waldron.
On this episode, Kory and I are joined by Jac Manuell to continue our top 25 unrestricted free agents. Specifically on this show, we focus on free agents 16 through 20. As always, you can catch The Outlet on all streaming platforms. Enjoy the show. All right, guys, at number 20, we have Paul Millsap.
So, the Nets target. Oh, it's not Serge Ibaka. We'll get to that guy a little bit later in the episode as well. But Paul Millsap, we look at what he's done most recently. And for Denver, he was a crucial part of their postseason success. Obviously, there were times where he was iffy on the offensive end, but when he was hitting that three ball, when Marcus Morris was talking trash into his face, do not stir the beast that is Paul Millsap, because he really stepped up. And I think that he can still his veteran presence, his quality defense, and his just general sort of basketball smarts and experience can provide a lot to any sort of contending team, whether it's at that sort of mini MLE, that MLE. He's earned a lot in his career already. You know, the contract that he got for Denver, I think, was something like the $30 million per year annum. So I don't necessarily know what he hasn't come out and said, like Danilo Gallinari, another name we'll talk about like, I want a championship. You know, he might want to get another little bit of a nice pay deal, whether it's, $15 million or $20 million for a short amount of time. And with Denver now, with Jeremy Grant as well, I don't know if they can keep both of them. So maybe that means that we could see Paul Millsap on the outs and the black and white or some other team as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like Paul Millsap. I think I'm a little bit lower on him probably than both of you guys, only because he is going to be 36 in February. We have definitely seen a slight decline in his athletic ability. But again, shooting splits this year are 48, 43, and 81. Very good. He could probably play some small ball five in certain lineups and in certain situations, which probably would benefit him actually at this point of his career. Because again, as a prototypical four, he's just not fast enough at this point. But again, another veteran, as you mentioned, Jack. I think there are plenty of contending teams that probably will look at Paul Millsap because he made his money on the last contract, right? He got paid to be with Denver. At this point, I would expect Millsap to want to win that title, or to at least be looking on situations that put him in the best position to possibly win a title. So again, Millsap can bring you veteran leadership, can definitely bring you some production, but it's going to be off the bench. His days of being obviously in the starting lineup are far behind him, I believe.
Yeah, and I think he's a guy you can get for the taxpayer mid-level exception. I think, like you mentioned, Kory, he could play small ball five. He can play some four off the bench. He gives you a versatile big. That's probably a little bit more defense-oriented at this point in terms of like basketball IQ. Offensively, he really picks his spots. Like, he had those nice shooting splits, but he doesn't take all of his open threes. He doesn't take all of his open shots. It's like he has to be in rhythm and he has to be like in the right mindset to really attack there. So I like Millsap. I think he'd be a great ad for a contender, and I think he will take that pay cut because, like you guys mentioned, that last year in Denver when they took his team option for $30 million, that was a massive overpay. So I think he should be good. He went to the Western Conference Finals with the Nuggets this year. He's been to the Eastern Conference Finals with the Hawks, never been to the finals. So kind of taking that next step will be big for him. What are some teams you think he could land on?
I think he could, if he wants to stay in Denver, he could sign for some sort of small deal if Jeremy Grant gets a hefty contract, because then that balance in that defense, he's been crucial because they've exceeded expectations, not just when they made the trade for Jeremy Grant this season, but last season as well. It was probably the most important part of their defensive identity and that overachievement. So I think Denver is still some sort of a possibility. Obviously, the Brooklyn Nets. I'm going to probably talk about that team a little bit because
especially in this range.
Yep, definitely, and I think as a makeshift starter and a guy who can close games in important situations and fix up sort of the defensive sort of mechanisms and sort of like DJ or Jared Allen are sitting, then you got Paul Millsap and Kevin Durant in that front court.
Yep.
Then I think I could definitely see that as a nice closing lineup for the Brooklyn Nets. You could talk me into Boston Celtics as well. I think that they could
thinking
really
the same thing.
Any sort of team that needs some sort of, like Kory was saying, playing some small ball five in pinch hitting situations and closing situations when it matters, because he just knows how to make winning plays, whether it's offensively or defensively, and he's smart enough to just know what the other team is doing as well. So I think that he, despite his age, like Kory said, 36, I was surprised about actually hearing that, but I still think he does have another 1-2 years max level in terms of providing what he did this season. He might take another small step back, whether that's in his efficiency or production, but I still think he'll add value to whatever team he's on next season.
If the
Yeah, for
minutes
sure.
get turned down, I think it'll really help him.
I'd agree. But like you mentioned, some of those teams, I think like all those contenders, right? Warriors, Celtics. I think the Raptors, right? If they lose out on Ibaka and Gasol, maybe they look to bring in Millsap to
And
bring
Gasol
some sort
already
of
rumored
veteran
to sign internationally, so
internationally, right? Exactly. I think there's a lot of destinations for a guy like Paul Millsap because again, I think he's also just a beloved guy.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, when him and Marcus Morris got into it in that Denver Nuggets versus Clippers series, the team rallied around Paul Millsap, right? And I think when you see a guy like that who stands up for the team and then people rally around him, I think that's the kind of guy you want in a locker room.
Yeah, I think you like the toughness, you like the leadership, and also a guy that just doesn't take shit. Like, you need that on contending teams. You need someone that's going to tell Marcus Morris to shut up. Like, that's just how it is. So
Everyone needs to tell Marcus Morris to shut up.
Yeah, Dallas could have used somebody in the series prior. You know what I mean? Or 2 series prior, whatever it was.
That
Like,
was easy as well.
yeah,
Why not?
Yeah, and even Paul Millsap is such a plug and play fit off the bench because of like what we talked about. He can still technically play the 4. You want to probably see him more at the 5. You don't mind starting him in certain periods of time. So, and he's a guy that just has a high basketball IQ, and like Jack said, he just kind of makes winning plays. So I think Millsap will have, I don't want to say an easy time finding a job. It might not be the contract he wants, but teams will be calling. But next up, we got Jae Crowder. Showed up in the NBA Finals, not necessarily to the level in which he showed up in the Eastern Conference Finals or against the Bucks, but still Crowder did some work for his paycheck this year.
Absolutely. I think that the deal that the Miami Heat garnered from Memphis to acquire him and Andre Iguodala, 2 guys that contributed to varying degrees, like you mentioned, Nick, over their playoff period and the bubble period. Jae Crowder obviously had to spend some time with Anthony Davis. No one's going to be defending Anthony Davis well, but he at least tried, and I think you got to give him some kudos there. And I think we sort of mentioned, Justin Holiday a little bit earlier in the episode. I think Jae Crowder is basically just an upgraded Justin Holiday, a guy who can probably play on the more important players, the Kawhi Leonards or the LeBron Jameses of the world, and play some small ball 4. Probably play anywhere from 3-4. Sometimes I think that they had Iguodala playing 5. Maybe Crowder could do that for them next season if they wanted to go that route and keep him in Miami. But I think that he is literally what every team is going to be looking for to add some wing depth, because it's the most shallow position in the league, but it's the most valuable position in the league. And even if it is a guy as inconsistent on the offensive end as Jae Crowder is, but man, when he is hot, it's like he almost replicates his former teammate Marcus Smart. Like, he'll take 7 shots and hit 7 of them, and then the next game he'll take 7 shots and hit 1 of them.
Yeah, Jae Crowder, as you mentioned, is a better version of Justin Holiday and probably a safer version than Marcus Morris. Probably isn't as efficient as Marcus Morris, but brings the same toughness and physicality as a guy like Marcus Morris, and more physicality than a guy like Justin Holiday. He's like right in the middle, which is good. Yeah. We're looking at these rankings; he's right in the middle between the 2. But Jae Crowder can provide some defense. We saw, as you guys mentioned, what he did against Anthony Davis. He is physical. He can hit the 3-point shot. Very good cutter, maybe an underrated cutter. And a good team guy. I feel like Jae Crowder's a guy who, like, whenever he's on your team, you love Jae Crowder.
Yeah.
So I definitely think Jae Crowder is going to be a guy that a lot of teams are looking at because, again, we saw what he did throughout the playoffs this year with Miami. He only played 12 games in the regular season with Miami, and he fit like a glove come playoff time in a shortened season with all this pausing and everything else that went on. So I think it only helped Jae Crowder's case, and I'm actually really intrigued to see what contender takes a look at Jae Crowder because, again, I don't think Jae Crowder plays for any team that's not playing for something come playoff time.
It's like Jae Crowder got like a +5 to his overall rating when he got traded to the Miami Heat. Like he wasn't really doing much in Memphis. A lot of people were like, yo, how did he play so well for Brad Stevens? Like all this stuff. And then, he really popped off in Miami with Eric Spoelstra, just kind of fit that mindset. I think he's almost like a perfect fit starter or a bench guy. Like the Heat had to use him probably a little bit more than you'd want to, especially in terms of depending on his offense. But like Jack mentioned, like you mentioned, Kory, defensively is where he kind of really provides that versatility. Being able to defend 3s, to be able to defend 4s, even sliding to the 5 sometimes, or even having to switch onto a 1 or 2. And with so many teams wanting to be switching in terms of the postseason, that's where Jae Crowder gets really attractive because he's just a guy that you can put out there and not worry about his defense. And he's willing to play, I think, bigger than his actual size because he's not a super tall guy, but he feels bigger on the court. So Jae Crowder is going to be an interesting name. I feel like Miami is going to likely offer him a 1-year deal that's probably worth more than what he's worth, but it's going to let them keep the player and then have cap space for 2021.
Yeah, I think they might do that with one of the other free agents that we'll talk about too.
Yeah, agreed. But moving on from Jae Crowder, up next on our list, we got KCP, who we just mentioned. So number 18, KCP, who had a nice postseason and maybe the Lakers' 3rd best player this season.
I would agree. I personally think that the hate the hate that Lakers players get is just, man, it's like the saltiness and the just stay off the keyboards, guys. Like seriously, it's not that deep. It's basketball at the end of the day. But in saying that, KCP was on the jump. He has declined his player option. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think with Clutch, like that's just a more likely scenario, and understanding where he ranks on that team. And I heard this on the Hoop Collective podcast. Like, how are you going to tell KCP that he doesn't deserve money when you're playing Danny Green $15 million a year, and KCP just outplayed him in the finals in the entire postseason?
Yeah,
exactly. Couldn't have put it better myself. So, whatever extension he's looking at getting at, we know that Clutch and Rich Paul are always looking to get the max amount of money for their clients, which is a real credit, and that's their job. It feels like that a lot of other agents have different priorities, but I think that whether it's a 3-year, $45 million deal, something around that sort of range, he's going to be back in LA. I think we all know that. I think the thing to ponder and consider is, what is the contract going to look like? Kory, do you have an inkling? What do you think he's worth? What do you think you'll get?
I mean,
I think big 1-year deal. I know you asked Kory, but I think it's a big 1-year deal, and then that way the Lakers keep their cap space, and then he has the option to go into 2021 and get a bigger contract.
All right.
Yeah, yep. I mean, like Nick mentioned to begin this little conversation about KCP. If Danny Green's going to be making $15 million, KCP is worth right around $15 million. Obviously, I think it'd be slightly less, but again, it's also a guy who's only 27 years old. Shooting splits of 46, 38, and 77. And again, came off a really strong playoff run and a really strong NBA Finals appearance. So I think he's definitely worth, if not 15, probably around 10 to 12 million. And he should probably get around 12. And I expect him to be back with the Lakers. And this is the guy who's he's a 3-and-D guard. And all the haters, as you mentioned, Jack, there was nothing to say or complain about KCP down this playoff run. If anything, the only thing they complained about was the fact that Danny Green was getting more shots than KCP.
Yeah, I thought KCP was really good, and he's a guy they just can't afford to lose. Like, they just don't have any options to add other players. Offensively, probably the best jump shooter on the team, which isn't necessarily saying much with the Lakers, but also his ability to chase guys off ball. Like, he chased Duncan Robinson. I thought he did a pretty good job in a lot of those games, and that's something they're going to have to worry about next year with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. You want to have a guy like KCP who can just kind of exert all of his energy defensively and kind of chasing guys. So it's likely he stays with the Lakers. I wouldn't be surprised if some other team tried to steal him away, maybe offer him a bigger deal. Would be one of those bad teams that has cap space.
Atlanta, I think,
Atlanta's been the targeted team, which would make sense for Atlanta because you still want three-point shooting at KCP, and he would add more defense than obviously they have because they play no defense in Atlanta at this point in time.
Yeah. And I think it also matches the timeline a little bit, like Kory was alluding to. 27 years old, Trae Young, obviously, they're not going to be contending for a little while, but KCP is 27, far from beyond his main years. So I think that he's going to be, it's going to be intriguing because you bet that it's going to be interesting for me, the Rich Paul and LeBron things behind this, and it's like, all right, you want to be staying in LA. The money, what's the how much is KCP going to have ownership on his decision? It's going to be. I'm fascinated to see how it all plays out.
It kind of makes you think back to when the Cavs won a championship and JR and Tristan Thompson got paid afterwards.
Yeah.
So it could be a similar situation. I think KCP, though, is probably trending more upwards, where Tristan maybe was trending upwards, but I think we knew who he was at that point, and J.R. Smith probably had played his best basketball already. So it wouldn't be the worst decision for the Lakers. I do think they want to kind of hold on to some of that cap space moving forward, though, because I think other teams are going to improve. But moving on to number 17, we got Tim Hardaway Jr. He has a player option, I believe, for this year as well.
Yeah, I think it's around that $16 to $18 million range, if I'm not mistaken. And obviously,
I think he accepts it, right?
It would surprise me if he doesn't, but he's also in a similar sort of vein to KCP. I don't think he has the defensive acumen of KCP, but I also do think that he showed improved defensive skills under Rick Carlisle in Dallas. And obviously, you're going to play better defense in a better system under a better coach than you are when you're playing for a team like the New York Knicks. And funnily enough as well, that trade, they got the two best players out of it. But that's a discussion for another day, focusing on the free agency side of it. I would be surprised if he doesn't, in obviously an uncertain sort of salary cap market. But at the same time, Atlanta did show him interest in the past, weren't they?
He was on Atlanta.
He's on Atlanta.
He was on Atlanta. There you go. My bad. I was completely wrong in that. So
and Atlanta didn't match his offer sheet, I believe, from the Knicks. It was a crazy offer sheet anyways.
Yeah, he was one of the weird players that was on the Knicks, traded to Atlanta, and then ended up signing back with the Knicks.
Yeah, it's a weird one, to say the least. But I think that he proved that he can be like a quality role player, sort of like we've sort of spoken about with KCP, Jae Crowder, fifth sort of guy, maybe a sixth man, and provide some good offense. Better defensively than guys like Jordan Clarkson that we alluded to earlier in the pod, but not necessarily as good as a Jae Crowder or a KCP. But his offense is probably that much better, and he also has more size to him. And he can... It's not that he's terrible defensively. It's that he's probably average at best, but can be above average, given the night and the circumstances. And he's been forced to be better because Luka isn't necessarily the best defender either. So he's sort of stepped up in that sort of respect. And I thought that what he showed for Dallas in the postseason was quite promising. And I think he does complement the pieces with Luka and Kristaps. So I think that his best situation for him in terms of his to get the most money out of himself, and also to compete for and have success individually with the team, I think would be to opt into that player option, like you alluded to, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, he was, he wasn't very good the year prior to this. I mean, he had a career year, career best 58.1% true shooting percentage. Shot 39% from three. Obviously, he played in one of the best, historic offenses of all time with that Dallas Mavericks team, and they were a very talented offensive bunch. And obviously, playing alongside a guy like Luka Doncic, who makes the defense gravitate towards him. You have Kristaps Porzingis, who had a career year as well. Tim Hardaway Jr. definitely took advantage of that offense and having high-scoring weapons around him. And he showed out that he can be a very efficient three-point shooter. Because again, he was taking 11. Oh no, sorry, he's not taking 11.9. He was taking 7.2 three-pointers a game for this Mavericks team, and it was a crucial part of their offense. So I think probably ends up back in Dallas next year, accepting the player option. Because I think, as Nick kind of said, declining it in this type of environment and this type of circumstances where we don't really know what the cap's going to look like because of coronavirus and how many teams lost money, it probably makes sense for him to play one more year in Dallas inside of this offensive system, which has served him so well already, to try and get big money next offseason. But he can definitely provide offense. The defense, I'm a little bit lower on him defensively than you guys. I don't think he's that good still in the defensive end, but at least he puts in effort, which is, that says a lot at least. But again, his offensive strides this year were really impressive.
Yeah, I think defensively, he's still a guy that you're not going to put on a good offensive player, but he should be able to kind of hold his own against other players around his level. I think offensively, he's probably around the level of Jordan Clarkson, but like we've kind of mentioned, like Jack mentioned, defensively, he's a notch above that. And I think like he has kind of improved some of his decision making. Some of the shots he was taking in the past just weren't great. I feel like he understands his role in Dallas, and like you guys mentioned, playing with Luka, playing with KP, it's really worked out well for him. I feel like if he was their fourth option, they'd be in really good shape. If they could have another person to just get in there and be that third option above him, or you had Tim Hardaway as your sixth man, you'd feel pretty good about it. I just feel like in this situation, they just needed somebody a little bit better in the postseason to take that next step. But credit to him for having a good year. And like you guys mentioned, and like I mentioned earlier, I think it's almost a lock that he accepts the player option, just given that there'll probably be money for him in 2021. Anything else on Tim Hardaway before we move to 16?
Go to 16.
16 it is.
We got Christian Wood. Obviously had a big year. This is a guy that's bounced around on a couple different teams. It's always kind of showed that potential, but it felt like in Detroit he finally kind of popped off.
Yeah, he got some loves with the six-man and most improved player awards. I thought that, he averaged 24 points, 9 rebounds, while shooting 38.9% on three-pointers. A really big season from him. And, Bobby Marks did report for ESPN that he thinks that he'll get mid-level exception money at $9.3 million. I honestly think that he'll garner more, especially from, if we're talking about destinations, whether it's Detroit that wants to retain him. Obviously Andre Drummond is gone now, and that does allow him to sort of solidify himself as a starting center long term, alongside Blake Griffin at the 4. Whether obviously we don't know the health and production that Blake Griffin is going to provide going forward. But I also think a team like the Charlotte Hornets could do worse than throw some money at him, because they have that much money that they just don't know what to do with it. Why not throw it at a young guy who has shown production and is going to continue to improve? And this is going to be the contract that you throw at someone that's just like, all right, this is the potential contract. What are you going to give me for 460, 465? I think that you could do worse than a Christian Wood, who I think is only going to be on the up.
Yeah, I mean, Christian Wood has been impressive. I mean, he popped off when he had that stint with the Pelicans last season, in which he got some run time late in the season, played 8 games. They were a kind of a pop-off 8 games. Then again, playing in Detroit this year has definitely showed why Andre Drummond was moved, because they believe, or they're at least hoping. I can't imagine Detroit wanting him to go or letting him go after getting rid of Andre Drummond, because
having no young talent.
Right, because you get rid of Andre Drummond because you want to rebuild. Well, this is the young piece you need to rebuild around, or at least one of the pieces. So I think Christian Wood, obviously, as you mentioned, Jack, he has shown strides in every area of his game. Shooting 38% from 3 this year is probably one of the most eye-popping things, because if he starts becoming a stretch 5, a stretch 5 or a stretch 4, depending on how you want to play him, he makes him even better. Defensively, there's still a lot to be desired. Well, maybe not a lot to be desired, but you still want to see more strides in that area in particular. But again, offensively, he's definitely shown some pop, a decent rebounder. So the sky's the limit to a guy like Christian Wood. And I think a team that's looking for young talent, this is a guy you don't want to let off the board if you have the money.
This is a player that I feel like you could really benefit from signing to a long-term contract, because you could get him at undervalue, and then he could turn into a very good player later on in that contract, where in year 3 and year 4 you're looking at a major underpay. There's obviously a chance he doesn't live up to that potential, but like you mentioned, Kory, 3-point shooting improving, and defensively he has all the tools to be a good defender. It's more about refining them and understanding NBA defenses and basketball IQ and positioning and things like that, and probably getting a little bit stronger, because he's not necessarily the biggest guy on the court, but I really like what he can do on the floor and what he can provide, especially in the modern NBA. There's a chance he could be pretty switchy, and he could provide that spacing for you. So if I'm Detroit, I don't let him go. But like Jack mentioned, Charlotte would be a nice choice for him. Maybe even the Knicks. That's actually a power forward that you could play next to Mitchell Robinson. Yeah. Atlanta's got their bigs already, but I could see other teams trying to make a move for him. If you can get him for the mid-level exception, that would be a steal in my eyes, because I think there's a lot of potential with him. There's no guarantee he's going to hit it, but you could make an argument that what we saw last season is the real Christian Wood that we're going to see moving forward, and even take strides above that.
Do you think, before we move on to number 15, I was listening to this on a podcast, do you think there's a chance that Christian Wood does what Nerlens Noel did, take a 1-year bet on yourself season before, obviously, where the money is really going to be probably a bit higher in the 2021 season for next year? Obviously, Nerlens probably certainly regrets that. Yeah. 4 years, $68 million, I think it was.
He's never got it back.
And he's not going to get that money ever again. That offer is not going to be on the table. Whereas if personally, I know what I would do, secure the life-changing money, my guy. But also the bet on yourself thing does work if you're Jimmy Butler. He got the max. But I think that if you are not a star player, which Christian Wood isn't, he has some star potential, I guess. He could be a top 5, top 8 center in the league. I would highly advise him, if I were his agency and his management, to take the long-term
or maybe you just go for the 2 or 3 and you don't go for the 4-year deal or 5-year deal, because he could re-sign for Detroit for that, and then maybe you do the 2-year deal with the player option. I think if you're Christian Wood and you're really betting on yourself, you want to make sure that last year your deal, you have a player option. Being over only 25, like you said, Jack, you want to secure that money, because even if this contract runs out, you're still going to be able to get your second paycheck. You know what I mean? Your second big deal is going to be out there, because you're going to be hitting your prime at 27, 28, or 29, whatever it might be, and there will be money for you.
Yeah.
Sure.